Please meet me in your copy of God's Word in 1 Samuel chapter 6. 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 1. If you forgot your Bible or you don't have one with you this morning, there should be a hardback blue Bible somewhere underneath the chair in front of you. And you can find 1 Samuel chapter 6 on page 229. Oh, I thought I didn't have it. 229 of those blue Bibles. 229, 1 Samuel chapter 6. We're going to start with verse 1. Everybody there? Great. The ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us, with what shall we send it to its place?" They said, "If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand does not turn away from you." And they said, "What is the guilt offering that we shall return to him?" They answered, 5 golden tumors, which will make sense when we review. It is what it sounds like. And 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps, everybody say perhaps. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from off you and your gods and your land. Why should you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? After he had dealt severely with them, did they not send the people away? And they departed? Now then, take and prepare a new cart and 2 milk cows on which there has never come a yoke, and yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home away from them. And take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart and put in a box at its side the figures of gold which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off and let it go its way and watch. If it goes up on the way to its own land, to Beth Shemesh, then it is he who has done us this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by coincidence. I know I made some jokes at the beginning of the sermon last week about the titles, and this title comes, credit where it's due, comes to you from one of our deacons, Debbie Taylor, "Till the Cows Come Home." Till the cows come home is a really good one. I couldn't pass it up. Over the last few weeks, we've learned that true peace comes from God's presence with or without his provision. We've learned that when we keep sacrificial promises, we align our hearts with God's heart. We've learned that sin always spreads further than we intend, but never further than God can reach. We've learned that God opens our eyes to his will through his word. We've learned to trust God, not our religious symbols or our religious acts. We've learned that when God seems lost, all seems lost. But God is still God, and God is still fighting. and that even when God's people have lost, God is still fighting, because the battle doesn't belong to God's people. It doesn't belong to the enemies of God's people. It belongs to God. And so the battle's over when he says it's over. We've got a helpful time marker in verse 1 for how long the ark was with the Philistines. Look with me again at verse 1. The ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. And it was something that as we exited chapter 5, we weren't sure really how long all of that took for it to go from Shiloh. Let's see if I can get all the names straight. You think I can do it? Shiloh to Ashdod to Ebenezer to Gath to Ekron. We didn't know exactly how long that whole tour took, and I don't know if you remember or not, their idol Dagon laying face down before the Ark of the Covenant. So that whole thing took 7 months altogether. Do you think the people of God believed they were ever going to see the ark again? How many of you could receive the most devastating news of your life and continue to hope in God's plan for 7 months of complete silence on the issue? I'll bet a few of them had started to lose heart. Verse 2. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners or divineers or however you want to pronounce it, and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us, with what shall we send it to its place?" So just a quick recap. Over the last 7 months, they take it to Ashdod. They put it in Dagon's temple. Dagon falls down. They put him back up. He falls down again and breaks into pieces. And then they're like, we got to get this thing out of here. And everybody's starting to get tumors. And they say, send it to the next place. And they're like, we're getting tumors too. Send it to the next place. And then they're like, we're getting tumors too. Send it to the next place. And by the time it gets to the last place that it's going, Ekron, they're like, the people of Gath are trying to kill us by sending us this ark. And things are not going well for the Philistines. Temple of Dagon didn't work. Victory tour turned into a plague, death, and panic tour. Kind of sounds like a good metal concert, right, James? Plague, death, and panic tour. I'd go to that. We'll go together. Yeah. James and I really, really like the music that most of you hate. Okay, so this is... And they're like, we got to get this thing out of here. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Verse 3, they said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means. By all means means do whatever it takes. There is no sacrifice too big to get this straightened out. By all means, return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand does not turn away from you. It's really interesting here. Even though they're not God's people, even though they don't have God's word, even though they don't care about aligning themselves with God's will, they do know one thing about him. That if there's enmity between them and the God of Israel, if there's a breach in their relationship, to make that relationship right is going to require sacrifice. They got that. They got that. Now, to be clear, their motivation is make the tumors stop. God has blighted them with this plague. That is their motivation. Get him out of here. It's actually the motivation of every sinful heart. Get the righteous judge out of here. And by the way, that still hasn't changed about God. If there's enmity, if there's a breach in your relationship with God, the only hope you have to make it right is sacrifice. That's the only hope you have to make it right. Look with me again at verse 4. And they said, well, what is the guilt offering? What is the guilt offering that we shall return to him? They answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice. Let's start with what he's done to us. We'll just, we're going to return the ark, and we're going to return it with interest. There's almost a symbol there of, Lord, can you take the tumors away, please, with the ark? Lord, please go back to your place and take all the tumors with you. It's pretty serious. For the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. Verse 5. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps, we highlighted that, right? Perhaps, all of this, by all means, we're going to do something that perhaps will fix this. Maybe it will fix it. Perhaps. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from off you and your gods and your land. Even with their really limited knowledge, they know their only hope is sacrifice. But they've got to set up a test. Here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to make a plan and then think that maybe you have influenced the plan more than the God who has been punishing you. Right? That would be bad. That would be like being eased into a false. They don't know for sure that God and his ark are the reason that all of this is happening to them, and they want to know for sure that that's the problem. They want to know for sure that that's the issue. So they are going to devise a test that ensures that they don't corrupt the data of the theological test. Verse 7. Now then, take and prepare a new cart. So don't use the cart that you've been using before. Sometimes after years of use, a cart kind of like, veers a little bit to the left or something, right? New cart, brand new cart. Don't contaminate the test data. Brand new cart. Prepare a new cart and 2 milk cows, which by the way are not cows that normally haul things. 2 milk cows on which there has never come a yoke. Okay, no bias in the cows about what to do here. There has never been a yoke on these cows, and yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home away from them. Okay, that's pretty brutal. That's like, can you imagine? Like this poor cow, it's got a calf, it's giving milk. You're receiving the milk, and now you're like, no more baby, right? You take the calf away from the cow, and what are they doing? They want to make sure that the cow has every opportunity. It's all right. Look right up here. It's okay. They want to make sure that the cow has every opportunity to turn back. I was talking to Wei about this. Wei has 1,000% more experience with cows than I do, and so he said this is against the laws of nature. What they are asking these cows to do is to walk away from their calves. It's against the laws of nature. It's a pretty good test, right? Like there's not any way that these cows are going to take the Ark of the Covenant away from the Philistines unless God is making it happen. Right? Everybody with me? Verse 8, take the ark of the Lord. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D means it's the covenant name of God, Yahweh, there. And place it on the cart and put in a box at its side the figures of gold which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off and let it go its way, and watch. If it goes up on the way to its own land, to Beth Shemesh, then it is he who has done this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that this is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by coincidence. Which, I mean, when you consider how the plague spread right along with the ark, the fact that the coincidence argument is still on the table is a little crazy, right? I mean, how on earth could this possibly be a coincidence? But you got to remember, they don't believe that this God is the God of all gods. They don't believe that Yahweh is the King of Israel and the King of Kings. So maybe it's still a coincidence. And perhaps we can make all of this stop. Verse 10. The men did so, and took 2 milk cows, yoked them to the cart, shut up their calves at home, and they put the ark of the Lord on the cart and the box with the golden mice and the images of the tumors. And the cows went straight. The cows went straight in the direction of Beth Shemesh along one highway. And then listen, lowing as they went. Why are they lowing? Because they're walking away from their babies. They don't want to go, and they're going anyway. I think the test is working. They turned neither to the right nor to the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. So they're watching. They're like, please don't turn around. Please don't turn around. Please don't turn around. Please let this be the end of this. Let this be the ark going back to its place. Let it be that we have found the solution to this plague. Now, the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw the ark and rejoiced to see it. After abusing the ark as a weapon for a battle they wanted to fight. After losing the battle, after losing 4,000 soldiers, and then 30,000 soldiers, after losing the high priest's servants, and then the high priest himself, after losing the ark and God's manifest presence, the ark comes back on its own. The ark comes back on its own. Can you imagine what that scene was like? It says they're harvesting wheat. I think that's probably like a motion like this with a sickle. Farmers? Like this, right? I mean, they didn't have like the things we have today, right? So sickles. They're harvesting the wheat. And I wonder if you kind of like stop cutting in a straight line for a second. Like, what? The ark's back on its own. They rejoice. Verse 14. the ark came into the field of Joshua of Beth-Shemesh and stopped there. A great stone was there, and they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was beside it, in which were the golden figures, and set them upon the great stone. And the men of Beth-Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices on that day to the Lord. Isn't it interesting that even though the circumstance changed, God's requirement to right the wrong relationship didn't change? When you've had a breach in your relationship with the Lord, your only hope is sacrifice. Your only hope is sacrifice. Even though the ark had changed locations, even though it was once in the hands of God's enemies and now it's in the hands of God's people, all the circumstances had changed. And God's requirement is still the same. God hasn't changed, even though the circumstances have. Verse 16, and when the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron. So they must have been watching from a distance like, oh, that was a brand new cart. They're chopping it up, right? They're watching and slaughter the cows, see the smoke start to rise. Guys, I think we've got our answer to our theological test. I think it was the God of Israel that was doing that to us. Let's go back home and make the report that the issue is settled. Verse 17. These are the golden tumors that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to the Lord. One for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. And the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages, the great stone beside which they set the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth-Shemesh. So even at the time of the writing of this book, everybody still knows where that stone is, where the ark came back. Certainly, after all that the ark has been through, after all that God's people have been through, God's going to kind of ease up now, right? He's going to ease up on all these requirements. The list of requirements of how to handle the ark is pretty specific and it's pretty detailed. And I mean, haven't we been through enough, Lord, that we can ease up on some of these things? Certainly we can touch it and we can look at it, and we don't have to have these poles being held by just the right number of people, and it doesn't have to sit in the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle and all those requirements. Has God changed? Over the course of this entire rapidly changing circumstances, has God changed? Look with me at verse 19. And he struck some of the men of Beth-Shemesh because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. When the ark was in Dagon's temple, the holiness was too much to handle. The glory was too much to handle for their false idol. When it went on its tour, it was too much to handle. And now that it's back with God's people, nothing has changed. The manifest presence of God is still not safe for a sinner. And just for looking at the ark, 70 men dropped dead. God is still holy. He has remained unchanging despite all of the changing circumstances. He is still to be taken at his word, and his word is to be taken seriously. Then the men of Beth Shemesh said, this is really the main thrust of the whole text, who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God, and to whom shall he go up away from us? So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you. It's on its way back home. It's on its way back to where it belongs. What on earth are we to take from this story? It seems to me that it's this. God does not change with changing circumstances. It serves as a bookend all the way from the beginning of chapter 5 to the end of chapter 6. Can Dagon stand before the Lord? He cannot. Can the people of Ashdod stand before the Lord? They cannot. The people of Ebenezer? No. The people of Gath? No. The people of Ekron? No. How about God's people? No. God does not change with changing circumstances. God was the same in Shiloh as he was in Ashdod, as he was in Ebenezer, as he was in Gath, as he was in Ekron, as he was in Beth Shemesh, and as he will be in Kiriath Jearim. And can I just tell you that no matter what you have been through, no matter what the circumstances in your life that seem to be changing so fast they make your head spin and you can barely keep track of all the changes, no matter what you've been through in your life, God was the same before your diagnosis as he is after your diagnosis. And God is the same in the midst of your diagnosis as he will be in either your healing or your homegoing. God was the same in your drunkenness as he is in your sobriety. God is the same in your incarceration as he is in your release. God was the same in your child's wandering as he will be in your child's homecoming. God is the same when all seems lost as he is when he draws near. Because God doesn't change with our changing circumstances. One of the accusations that people will make against the God of the Bible is that he changed from the Old Testament to the New Testament. They'll look at a story like this. Plagues of tumors and mice and temple vandalism, which, by the way, is what God did to Dagon. Or 70 of his own people dropping dead because they could not stand in the presence of a holy God. And then they look at the teachings of Jesus, and they think, well, in the Old Testament, God was this, wrathful, vengeful deity, and in the New Testament, he's so warm and cozy, and full of mercy and grace. Years ago, I heard a New Testament scholar and professor in the Chicago area, his name's D.A. Carson, address that accusation. What he said is, when somebody comes to you and says, well, the God of the Old Testament is mean and angry, and the God of the New Testament is kind and gentle, you remind them that in all of human history, God has only ever allowed one innocent person to die. And that's in the New Testament. One of the things that we're seeing, the reason that sacrifice is required in order to restore our right relationship with God, and that's the same in Philistia, as it is in Israel, as it is in Caldwell, because God doesn't change despite the changing circumstances. The reason sacrifice is required is because of what the Apostle Paul says, that the wages of sin is death. That's what sin earns. And no one is righteous. No, not one. That all of us have turned aside. We're not like those milk cows. We don't walk in straight lines, not turning to the right or the left. We have all turned to our own way, away from God's way, and the wages of sinning, of missing the mark, of falling short of God's glory is death. Even to look upon his presence means death. And if we were a church that was obsessed with bad news, I'd pray right now and send you home. But we're not a church that's obsessed with bad news. We're a church that's obsessed with the good news, the gospel. God is the same in the Old Testament as he is in the New. Payment is still required to make us right with him, to justify us before him. And no longer do his people come safely into his presence because of the spilled blood of goats and bulls, but because of the spilled blood of the perfect high priest forever, once for all. We have no hope in our circumstances. The circumstances are going to change. And if you walked in here this morning feeling like you are at the bottom of a spiritual pit, the circumstances are going to change. And if you came in this morning feeling like you are on the top of a spiritual mountain in your life right now, the circumstances are going to change. But I want to point you to one who never changes, for whom access to his presence always requires a sacrifice. And here is the good news. He himself has made the sacrifice necessary on your behalf. Now, here's the question for you. If we were to pull up your budget, your calendar, your desires, your hopes, your dreams, if somebody was to walk with you through every moment of this last week, would they have any indication that you believe that your greatest hope is in an unchanging God making an unchanging sacrifice on your behalf? Or would they see Philistine faith? Maybe this will work. The gospel is the good news that while we were still sinners, Jesus was born, he died on the cross, he rose from the dead, he went to heaven, and he's coming back again. That is the good news. God is unchanging, okay? That's the good news, whether you believe it, whether you receive it, whether you want to hear it or not. The gospel is the good news that while we were still sinners, not once we got our act together, not once we were worthy to come into his presence, but while we were still unworthy to come into his presence, he came and he died and he rose. And he went to heaven. And he's coming back again. And the response that we ought to have is to receive his sacrifice. That if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, we'll be saved. And if you've never confessed with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believed in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you're not saved. The wages of your sin will be death, not only cessation of your physical life, but separation of your spiritual life from the presence of God. Because sin cannot stand in his presence. And the same God that was the same God in Ashdod, and now back with his people in our story, the same God who is the God today, will be the God on the day that Jesus comes back. And his judgment is not going to change. And it will be perfect. It will be decisive. And your only hope is to find yourself under the blood of Jesus Christ.